Hi, everybody. Welcome to Josh and Austin Figure It Out. We've got another episode for you. Believe it or not, we've got another guest. So we're just thrilled to have Aaron Francis here. Welcome, Aaron.
Yeah, Aaron figures it out too. I have nothing figured out, so this is a perfect spot for me to be in. I'll figure it out with you.
That makes three of us. How are you all doing today? How are you, Austin?
I'm doing well, Josh. I shouldn't say it that enthusiastically, though. We've had a sick household. We've been a sick household this past couple weeks, and this is our first experience of like the sickness bouncing around to the different family members. Like one gets it, and then they start to recover, and then pass it to the next one. That classic experience of late winter in a house with small kids. So I think we're on the other side of it, but it's amazing how sick you can get of sitting in one spot under a blanket in just the course of a few days. But other than that, I'm doing okay. How about yourself?
I'm doing pretty well. I had some lunch with friends today at an Indian restaurant, so that was fun. I haven't had Indian food a whole lot before, so that was a fun experience. We're pretty healthy here, thankfully, but expecting a large blizzard tomorrow, maybe not. We'll see.
Something we'll have to explain to Aaron.
Yeah,
Yes,
I don't know
yeah.
what that is. It's the first time I've heard that word.
Aaron, you're down south, right?
I am. Yeah, I'm in Dallas, Texas, and while we don't get blizzards, we do get snow. And a few years ago, we got snowvid, which was in the middle of COVID. We got all this snow, and then our electrical grid fell over, and so we didn't have power for a week. And
That's
my wife
right,
was
yeah.
pregnant with our first set of twins, and it was like, this is the worst thing ever. So I am familiar with snow, even if we don't get it terribly often.
Right.
Yeah, so something unique that you just said right there is your first set of twins. That's not
Yeah,
something
not a phrase that's uttered very often.
that's not a common phrase. So I think you have more than one.
Yeah, we have two sets of twins. So we have two, three, almost, what is it, March? Almost 4-year-olds. And then we have two 1-year-olds who just
Wow.
turned one in November. So they're one in a little bit. So we've got two sets of boy-girl twins that are 2.5 years apart. So we had 4 kids under 3 at one point.
Wow.
Wow, that's great. So you're very familiar with the sickness conversation.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
probably an easier question of when are you not sick, which kid is not sick at any given time
Correct.
than the other.
Yeah,
way
I'll
around.
I'll spare everyone the gory details, but I had a non-vomit record for a long time, and it just that record is just obliterated now that I have
no.
4 children. Yeah, it's not great, not great.
That-
But fortunately, I haven't gotten sick in from them probably 6 months or so.
Wow,
So
that's
knock
big.
on wood, that's pretty good.
Congratulations.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
That's awesome. Yeah, you'll take the win when you can. So, yeah. So, Aaron, I wrote a little intro for you for the listeners who may not be familiar with you, like my family and friends in Iowa. But let's see how we did. Aaron Francis is a developer, educator, open source aficionado, screencaster, dad, and all-around good guy. He's the co-founder of Try Hard Studios, which has launched 3 screencast series. 3? Is that 3?
We've
that an
launched
accurate
4
number?
now, 3 of which I have been the instructor for. So
Nice,
I'll forgive
okay.
that. Yeah.
Off by 1 error, it's fine. And he's created some really cool open source tools for Laravel and JavaScript communities. Most recently, the Fusion and Solo projects, which we've both seen on Twitter and enjoyed from afar. So we're just really excited to have you here and to chat about some of that stuff and some other stuff too.
That's a great intro. I'll take it.
Yes.
That's awesome. I appreciate
you.
it. Hello to Josh's friends and family in Iowa that don't know me. It's nice to meet
Yeah,
you.
we forgot to tell you that the main listenership of this podcast is immediate family.
That's
and
great.
People we pass on the street that we can hand out our card to.
If that's
so.
the case, let's talk about family drama. Who's the family member you like the least? This is perfect. Yeah.
We don't need to get into that, right?
Yeah.
That's for a private podcast.
Private
So-
feed.
Yeah, that's a Patreon only episode. So Aaron, let's man, we got so much we wanted to chat about. Let's chat about something recent though, something that you launched recently. which is Fusion, which you chatted about, I think, at Laracon EU. So just a quick context before we get into it. I am a JavaScript guy.
Okay.
I've never written any serious Laravel, though I'm a Laravel appreciator from afar. And Josh is kind of the best of both worlds. He's a very smart JavaScript guy, but he also has built and sold a SaaS built on Laravel.
Oh, nice.
So
Oh, great.
he knows much more about what's going on there than I do. But why don't you just give me a quick overview of what Fusion is and why did you dig into it?
Yeah. One construct that I find very useful as like a thought exercise is, what if we took something that exists and we take it 5 steps beyond what is reasonable? And like, what does that open up? And so Fusion is the result of that question. And that question applied to an existing technology, which is Inertia.js. And so for Josh's friends and family that are listening, this part's going to be very boring, but I will describe to you what Inertia is. Inertia is basically like an adapter layer that sits between your front and back end. So you could pick Rails and React. You could pick Laravel and Svelte. You could pick Django and Vue.js. And what Inertia does is it gives you like the power of a fully featured batteries included backend and the power of a modern component driven front end. And it kind of like binds the two together in a way that is much more ergonomic. Now, I looked at this and thought, Inertia's great. I love Inertia. And then I partnered up with my now partner, Steve, at Try Hard Studios. So we started this company together. Steve is like a proper JavaScript guy. He comes from the other side. I come historically from the back end side. He comes from the front end side. And so we see things a little bit differently, right? Those communities are similar in some ways, but very, very different in others. And so Steve and I are working together on all these course platforms. And I'm like, hey, we're going to use Inertia. You're a Vue.js guy. I'm a Laravel guy. Obviously, Inertia goes in the middle. He's like, that sounds great. We start using Inertia, and he's like, I wish this was better. And I'm like, this is better. What are you talking about? This is the best. And he's like, no. Look at what I can do in Nuxt. And I take a look at Nuxt for the first time. I use Vue, but I've never used Nuxt because I have Laravel, right? So I look at Nuxt and I'm like, oh, that is kind of nice. I observe from the outside what the Next.js community is doing. I see a lot of, in my opinion, mistakes, but I also see some very good ideas. And I'm like, that is also interesting. And then I look with fresh eyes back at Inertia and I'm like, hey, we could go ham on this. Let's take this to like the logical conclusion. And so what I did was I started from the idea of what if we could make Nuxt or Next and have a lot of those niceties of like dancing across the network, what's front end, what's back end, but have the back end be Laravel, the front end be Vue or React, and have Fusion in the middle that kind of binds the two together in a much tighter way. And so something that Fusion does is when you expose like variables or actions on the back end, they just become available on the front end. And that is a very like Next or Nuxt style thing. Maybe React server components would be close. And so that was the exercise. The exercise was, what if Inertia was for Laravel only, which is like scopes it down really far, and what if it felt more like Next or Nuxt, and we could kind of compose across the network. That's kind of the gist of the whole thing.
It's really fascinating, and I love these experiments of jumping in and saying like, what's the most extreme thing we could do? What is something you would look at and be like, oh, that's a terrible idea, and then go off and do it and be
yes.
like, I can do it because it's awesome.
Yes.
One experience I've had is trying to build like an early days React server components type of framework at Shopify a few years ago, and it's eerie how like we ended up down a similar path, I guess, of effectively parsing out some code with Vite. I think is probably similar to what you do.
Exactly right.
Right. Taking some blocks that are in an existing file, sticking them somewhere else, and then doing something with them later on. And then you have this integrated like authorship experience, but then the output is drastically different. I'm curious, like what was that like your first V0 approach, like, oh, I know I'm going to go and use Vite, like a Vite plugin, a big Vite plugin to build this, or had you tried other types of parsing?
I was barely aware of the existence of Vite before I did this. So let that be an encouragement to anyone listening. You don't have to know anything. You just gotta start. So no, the first iteration of this was very, very different. In Laravel, we have the concept of like API resources, right? So you can take a model and say like, here's my podcast model. And instead of like just sending the model out to the front end, you can say like, let me put it inside of this API resource, which is going to define the shape, what fields should be exposed, how it should be serialized into JSON, that kind of stuff. And then we'll send that podcast resource out to the front end. And that gives us kind of like this separation, this barrier between the model and the front end. And so that was my original thought was, what if I make super rich resources that not only include state, but also include behavior. And so that was similar to where Fusion ended up, is state and behavior. But the original idea was, what if you send out a podcast and the podcast on it has like favorite, unfavorite, listen later, that sort of stuff. And so I was like, I had gotten pretty far down that path. And then I started talking to several people, one of whom was Taylor Otwell. And I was like, hey, I submitted to Laracon EU. I got accepted. And at that point, like the library was not even close to done. And I thought, if I get accepted, I'll finish this library. So I got accepted. Taylor was like, hey, what's going on here? What are you building? And I told him, and, he was like, oh, cool. Thumbs up. Great. And, later he came back and was like, I've been thinking, if you can get to this level of DX, that would be really awesome. And the thing that he showed me was very much like a single file component, which is, I think, Volt over in the Livewire ecosystem, which is Taylor's, pet project is Volt. He wrote that himself, and he's like single file components for Volt or for Livewire. And so that kind of turned the course a little bit, where he like sent me this screenshot. And it was basically, with some differences, it was basically what Fusion turned into today. And so what I did was I looked at that and thought, I don't know, I have no freaking clue how I'm going to get there, but I believe that I can get there. And so I sat down, and in a view single file component, I wrote a PHP tag and then $ name equals Aaron. And then that was like, now what? You've got to figure out how to get this variable, this state, into this JavaScript template. And that's where I got led down the Vite rabbit hole. And Vite is incredibly powerful. And I knew literally nothing, I'm not being hyperbolic. I knew literally nothing about Vite. And with the help of sheer force of will and a lot of AI, we got to like a pretty robust Vite plugin that accomplishes a lot of the work. The whole process is relatively complicated, but Vite does a majority of that heavy lifting.
Yeah, it's really impressive. The Vite API, it just seems very approachable because it starts off so simple, and you can kind of dip your toes in the water and do something here and there, and then all of a sudden you're doing pretty magnificent things with what you're doing with Fusion, and you can go from 0 to 100 pretty quick. Yes. I've been really impressed by that project. Yeah,
Vite's amazing.
Aaron, do you envision folks building like an entire app on Fusion? Like you'll have to forgive my ignorance of Laravel, because I've never built anything real if I haven't used Laravel. But like, how do you envision folks like making a database call in there and like authing users and scheduling jobs and stuff?
Yeah. So I mentioned obliquely that I think Next has made several mistakes, or React server components have made several mistakes. And one of the mistakes, and this is of course a preference thing, one of the mistakes I think they have made is making it very unclear where your code is going to be executed and where it's going to be exposed, right? So we even saw this week, I don't know if y'all saw it, we saw Upstash, they wrote a tutorial on the Upstash blog by the Upstash DevRel person. They wrote a tutorial that exposed Upstash keys, and it was like, what are we doing? Like, why are we writing code that we can't really reason about? Is it going to end up on the front end, or is it going to end up on the back end? If a DevRel at Upstash can make that mistake, the normies don't stand a chance. And so that's one of the things that I think Next has really made a mistake on, or maybe it's React server components. I'm unclear about the relationship there. And so something that Fusion takes a pretty hard stance on is the backend is PHP. I'm not transpiling. I'm not turning it into WASM. I'm not doing anything. The backend is PHP. The front end is JavaScript, and there the twain shall meet. So like they are separate. Now, you do write them in the same file, but after the process is done, you end up with a traditional controller and a traditional view. And there's a little magic in between, but it's still PHP runs on the back end, JavaScript runs on the front end. So to the question at hand, do I expect people to do like build full apps? My point of view on that is if you treat the Fusion file, the PHP in your Fusion file, if you treat it as a thin controller, you can write a full application using Fusion. If you're like, I want to write 400 lines of PHP code, I think that's a mistake, and you should either make a proper controller, which is fine, you can do that in Fusion, or you should turn your Fusion component into a thin controller. And so my point of view is that kind of on the edge of your application, you've got your ingress points, right? So you've got HTTP. So maybe you've got like your web app, maybe you've got API, maybe you've got CLI, maybe you've got background jobs or something that like kicks off. And so you've got all these ingress points into your application, right? Of which HTTP with like web views and stuff is one. Now, I think Fusion and maybe controllers in general should basically serve the purpose of translating HTTP input into the rest of your application. And the rest of your application is where that logic should live. So in the case of Laravel, that becomes something like a plain PHP class that is just like an action, and you can execute the action. So you have like a podcast publish action. And sometimes that's instantiated by a command line, sometimes by API request, and sometimes by a Fusion request. And so that's my point of view, is that the stuff that you're writing in your Fusion file should basically call out to somewhere else after you kind of like take all the HTTP away from it. So you validate the user input, you make sure that like they have access to this resource, and then you hand it off to a deeper part of your application.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. Even for someone that hasn't written a controller since I did C# in school.
Love a controller.
I haven't talked about a controller in years.
I'm trying to stay up to date with the world, but there's part of me that's like, give me MVC all day, give me a controller. I love it so much, but you know, I'm evolving.
everything is controllers underneath. It's it may look like a fancy new technology, but it's a controller.
But Austin, you're right. Steve is the same way. He's like, yeah, I don't really think in MVC. And I'm like,
yeah.
What do you think in then? If not MVC, what else is there? And I'm trying to come to terms with perhaps I'm old now. So Fusion is keeping me young, at least.
Nice.
Great.
Nice. How's I mean, you just released it a few weeks ago. I mean, by the that's a terrible thing to say on a podcast, because then this gets released a week later or whatever. But what's the vibe? Is it like making progress? I know you were working with some folks to maybe add a React flavor.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yep.
Do you feel like that's full speed ahead?
I don't think the React one is full speed ahead yet. So I released it at Laracon EU, which was several weeks ago. Who can say? Because when are you listening to this? It was, at some point in history, and since then. Yeah. I've kind of been doing some internal refactoring, and there's a community that's like already like pulling it down, trying it out, playing along, offering advice, and so the motion is happening. But it's a lot of pieces to orchestrate, and so getting the foundations set up correctly is relatively important. And so I kind of want to crush that before we move on to React. Just get that Laravel view story really nailed down, so that when we do move to React, we're not like fighting on two fronts at the same time. But yeah, React is coming, unfortunately for me, because I don't know React. But React is obviously the biggest JavaScript player in the space, and so we got to get there eventually.
Yeah, cool. Well, I'm gonna keep my eye on it. It's really exciting, and keep pushing with it. Super pumped.
Yeah, thanks. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. what about Solo? Do we want to chat about Solo? Because this is
Oh boy.
another thing. This is like where Fusion is here's an idea of a new way of writing code for frameworks. Like Solo is like, here's an existing idea of terminal user interfaces that goes deep down and says, what if we could do it a little better? And so like if I were to say, I guess what Solo is, no, why don't you give us like your sales pitch of this?
We were
Because
so close. We were
better
so
than
close to seeing how my marketing,
I was
how
gonna-
effective it was. Okay, so again, ignorance is a superpower in some cases, right? So in some cases, in the case of the author of SQLite, most widely used database in the world, trillions of SQLite databases exist, hundreds on my phone, hundreds on my computer. If you look in Google Chrome, you'll see SQLite databases everywhere. The author of SQLite, he wrote this, I think in maybe the year 2000, very early, he said, if I had known you weren't supposed to write a database from scratch, I wouldn't have written a database from scratch. And I feel that in my bones. Like, if I had known that you weren't supposed to reinvent tmux in PHP, I wouldn't have done it. But I accidentally did it because I didn't know. Like, I've never used tmux. I've heard people say tmux. I looked at the docs
Same.
once and I was like, this looks complicated. I'm not smart enough to get this. And so Solo basically is it is a single command that you can run that inside of it spawns a configurable number of commands. So imagine you're developing a web application and you need to run Vite, for example. Very common. You need to run Vite. You also need to start perhaps your PHP HTTP server, which is separate from Vite. Maybe you also want to tail your logs. Maybe you need to start your queue worker. Maybe you need to start your WebSocket server. Now we're up to five things where you have to go like spawn all of these processes just to develop your application locally. It gets a little bit annoying, and it makes it hard to like onboard team members, right? And so you're in this situation where it's like, I've got all these things that are required for my application to run. I could make everyone use tmux. Again, don't really know what tmux is. We could spin up Docker, but it's like, I don't want to do that. I don't like Docker. I don't want to use Docker. Docker's great. I don't like it. So
Same.
Where does that leave us, right? And so where that leaves us, or where that left us before Solo, was there is a NPM package called concurrently. And so Taylor noticed this problem in the lifecycle of a Laravel application, noticed this problem, and wrote basically a thin shim for npx concurrently. And like shipped it with the Laravel application starter. So it's like you can download Laravel, start a project, and run composer run dev, and npx will actually spin up concurrently, and you've got like 4 processes running. I looked at that and I thought, this is better. This is a step in the right direction. However, it leaves a little bit to be desired. Primarily what it leaves to be desired is it's very hard to read the munged output, right? So you've got HTTP requests coming in and logs and your WebSockets and your queues, and you're like, I can't see anything. It's all munged together, and you can't stop one and start one. And so I saw this and I thought, boy, we could do better, couldn't we? And knowing nothing, I thought, this will be easy. Why don't I just do this? Famous last words. And so I wrote a single command that spawns, and it gives you this nice little Chrome, like this nice little box on your command line. So it's a terminal application, but it gives you this nice little ASCII art of like, hey, here's all your logs, and you can like hit the right arrow and tab over. And so now we're at a place where Solo is a configurable process runner for your local Laravel development. And so you can say, here are the 14 commands that I might run in developing this Laravel application. I'm going to put those in a config file. Here are the 3 that I want to auto start when I run solo. And so you can start solo and like Vite, your server, and maybe your logs start, but you also have the option to like arrow over to Reverb or to your queue worker and say like, I'm working on that part of the stack now. Let me start that command. And so it gives you a nice interface into running your application locally. And it gives you some niceties around, starting, stopping, restarting, pausing, all of the commands. And then when you quit solo, through great pains, it goes and kills every underlying process to make sure that like it cleans up after itself. And that took a lot of work because that's not a level of system I'm used to dealing with. And so I'm like, how do I keep track of these processes? But we finally got there. And so now we're at a spot where it's a pretty robust local development aid for your Laravel applications.
Yeah, it's a really cool project. And I think the first thing I thought of when you were chatting about like, when you're developing, you got to start your queues and your WebSockets. I'm like, maybe in Laravel, in JavaScript, those are all SASs that we're paying for.
Yeah. In JavaScript, you got to get your credit card out, and then you got to get your credit card out, and then,
But we're not running any of those things locally. I'm paying someone to do that.
That's funny.
But yeah, besides that, it's really a cool project. And I like how, obviously you mentioned it before with Fusion as well, but like having these ideas and being like, I don't know the journey. I don't know how to get there, but I know what I want to end up with. I know where I want to go. And it's literally put one foot in front of the other, figure out the next thing you have to do, then figure out the next thing. And when you look back, you've built an entire TUI application with all this crazy functionality. And it's really a cool story, again, similar to Fusion. But also another really, really great and useful package that I think the Laravel community is going to find exceptionally useful. So kudos again to you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's like it very much is figure out one problem after the next. And sometimes it feels like running through a wall only to discover there are more walls behind it. That is what it feels like. I have sat at this desk and literally banged my head on the desk. Like literally bent over and banged my head on the desk because I'm like, I am out of my depth here. I don't know what's happening. I don't understand. I've never been here before. I'm incredibly frustrated. And you know what happens? You just keep going. You just keep pushing, and eventually all the problems fall over. And it is incredibly frustrating, but it's matched by the satisfaction of getting out the other side and realizing like, I did that. And that's incredibly empowering. The next time you run into that problem or a problem of similar shape, you think, I've been here before. I broke through that wall. I can do this again, and it's going to suck, but I can do this. And that's like, that builds up inside of you, and it pays dividends in the long run.
Yeah, the mental fortitude. So like if you go to the gym and you're doing something that's challenging and it's super frustrating the first couple times, and then you start getting past it, and then all of a sudden like it's still hard, but it's not defeating anymore. And so it's really hopeless. Right. Yeah. You build up a confidence to it. And it's a really good skill to develop and a good practice, I think.
So when do you think you'll be raising a seed round for Solo?
Man, I don't know. If I was in JavaScript, I would have done it already.
Exactly.
I don't know. Like, I know it's mostly in jest, but I look at like these dev tool companies and I'm like, man, y'all are raising a lot for a little. Like I don't understand why this is even a business. And that's something Steve and I have talked about is like, hey, we're playing in the dev tool space. Does this ever make sense? And it doesn't yet, but Steve and I have always joked that like we are 100% for sale. Like people always say like, oh, I would never sell my company. It's my baby. Yeah. We would sell immediately for the right amount of money. So if you're rich and you're listening, yes, we would sell, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, no, I get that I'm a former employee of an ORM that raised multiple series of multiple rounds of funding. So I'm familiar with that world and have some thoughts we can put in the Patreon only podcast.
Yeah. So we'll talk crap about your family and then talk crap about ORMs. I love it. That sounds great.
Ooh, yeah. This is something we need to make a reality, I think.
It's a spicy pod.
Cool. Speaking of the business side of things, Try Hard Studios, your screencasting or your screencasts, your series, but then also there's a series about screencasting, which is so fascinating to me. And I love to know like what out of, so it's Postgres, SQLite, screencasting, and what was the fourth one?
High leverage Rails. So we had a
Oh
guest
yeah,
instructor come teach SQLite and Rails together.
cool. What's been your, I guess your most enjoyable one from start to finish of building those out? Because I know it's an incredible amount of work to not only research the source material, but then also record and write and edit all that stuff.
Yeah, it's just a tremendous amount of work. And the shape of these courses are very different. So I'll speak to the ones that I was an instructor on. The high leverage Rails one was great because I didn't have to teach it. So maybe that's my favorite.
It's the best.
So of the courses I've done, you mentioned screencasting.com, SQLite, and Postgres. So SQLite and Postgres are both flavors of databases, as you well know. I've also done at a prior employer, which we'll save for the spicy pod. I did a course on MySQL, which is also a database flavor. So I've got 3 databases under my belt. And then I did a course for Laracasts on an open source library that I wrote. And then the very first course I did was financial accounting for sophomores at Texas A&M University, and that course is still alive. And so these are all disparate, right? They're very different, and some of them group up together. So like the database courses are incredibly difficult for me to make because I'm a self-taught developer. I happen to know databases very well. I happen to love them. I find them that they fit into my brain in a very satisfying way. But when it comes time to be a database educator, I felt that I needed to learn a lot more, right? So I had a lot of real world experience. I didn't have a lot of like formal education on it. And so right or wrong, I thought I need to go learn this stuff. And so MySQL, SQLite, and Postgres were just massive slogs of learning, like tons and tons. I have some documents here. I don't know if this is the video podcast or not, but
we're getting a prop.
Yeah, here's
Yeah.
thousands of pages,
Wow.
and this is just SQLite only. To say nothing of the books, this is just the documentation and the blog posts, and so that's like a ream of paper, literally like thousands of pages, and those are grueling. It is very difficult. You go through the trough of sorrow. Who am I to do this? I'm not qualified. What am I gonna say? You go through that whole process, and I think the reason is the shape of this content is extremely technical. There is often a right answer and a wrong answer. And that's a lot of pressure. And beyond that, there are times where the right answer is wrong and the wrong answer is right. And like you have to know all of that stuff. And so you have to gain this like massive breadth of knowledge and then compress it down into something that is consumable by somebody that hopefully has way less expertise than you, right? And so you're like, hey, I know about the entire universe. You know nothing. How do I distill this and still be technically right? So those are like exhausting. Very valuable in the end, but very exhausting. Screencasting, on the other hand, screencasting.com is vibes only. There's no right answer. It's like an art form. It is what is Aaron's personal preference. Of course, there are a lot of technical things in there, and I teach a lot of technical things about like, here's how I believe you should set up your screen. Here's how I believe you should set up your camera and your lighting. But at the end, nobody can argue, right? Nobody can say you shouldn't set your screen up that way. People can say, I would set my screen up differently. That's fine. I don't care about that. You bought the course because you want me to tell you my opinions on screencasting. And so that's super vibey. That's just like, hey, I'll do a little bit of research, but not very much. But the point is I'm going to write down everything that I believe in, and I'm going to turn that into an outline, and then I'm going to turn on the camera and start teaching you my personal preference way of doing things. And so the breakdown between like hard computer science and kind of like art, like vibes only, it's like the vibes only courses are way easier and a lot more fun, frankly, because it's just like, here's what I believe. Don't really care if you don't. Here's why I believe it. Go and have fun. And so those just take way less out of me.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, the vibes stuff too, but also just your personal take on things is a lot of times what I'm looking for when I go out and I'm whether it's looking at open source code or buying a course. It's I want to know what this person thinks is the best approach, the trade-offs involved, rather than like giving me all of the world's information about a thing. Like, show me what you think, and then I can take that in and form my own opinions. And so there's a lot of value to that out there. And it's nice that you're able to have something that's more based on that, rather than having to go and learn a deep dive into database software, for sure.
Yeah, that part gets a little bit tiring.
Yeah.
I think it's funny, Aaron, when like listening to you describe your process of the database courses, it's like, it sounds like you're an LLM training itself. Like
I am
trying to absorb this enormous amount of information, then distill it into this.
Yes,
this tiny
I read it
segments.
all, compress it to vectors in my head, and then regurgitate it. Yeah, and even in those, Josh, you said something that I think is true. Even in the hard technical courses, is people still want my opinion, right? Yeah. So with enough force of will, they could go do all the same stuff that I have done, but at the end they want my opinion on what they should do, what's best, what's like optimal here or there. They want my experience. And so that part comes easily. There are databases that I couldn't go out and research and then teach because I've never actually used them. And so like, could I do Mongo? Not really, because I've never used Mongo. And half of the value or more, but at least part of the value of even in the hard technical courses is, here are all the facts. Now, knowing those facts, here's what I recommend. And I feel like that is that's what separates, hopefully what separates an instructor from a proper LLM is I can say, I've seen this, I've seen that, don't do this, yes, do that, and beware of this, based on my experience.
Yeah, for sure. It goes without saying your contributions are far more valuable than that of an LLM.
I feel like an LLM though. And of course, like I fear, that's the existential fear is, right or wrong, are people going to assume that LLMs can hold all the answers? And it doesn't matter if I believe that the best way to learn is from an experienced instructor on video. And it doesn't matter if that is the objectively correct way to learn. If everyone believes that they can just learn from an LLM, it doesn't matter what is true. It doesn't matter what I believe. And so there's a part of me that's like, how can I continue to lean into my humanness? Because that is the thing that LLMs cannot do. And so we're always exploring, like, what do we do here?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. As someone who has watched through a couple of your courses, which are very excellent, by the way. Everyone go out and spend your money or your company's money buying Aaron's stuff. As someone who's both watched Aaron's stuff and has chatted a lot with LLMs, specifically about database questions, I think I'm going to pick Aaron. I'm going to pick Aaron most of the time.
That's good. That's
you,
good.
you have,
I still have you for now. We'll see.
You have
I still have
one
you.
point
Yeah.
in Aaron's camp so far.
Yeah. My hope is that everything I teach makes you a better LLM user, right? So if I can lay a foundation, if I can teach you some fundamentals and help you internalize some truths about complicated technical content, you can then go and ask better questions or realize when it's hallucinating or say like, hey, I remember this technique. Is this applicable here? And it's going to say, wow, great point. Yes, definitely. And it's like, well, you should have told me that up front. So my hope is that like we're laying a foundation that makes you more effective at using LLMs in the long run.
Yeah, 100%. I also think it's funny that we spent like the first 30 minutes talking about essentially your side projects before we mentioned that you have your own business selling courses and doing all this other stuff. It's all
business now, yeah.
Doing all this other stuff on top. And Aaron, I think we're right around. Has it been right around a year since you and Steve have been doing Try Hard? Has it been? Has it been over a year now?
No, I think like I would have to look at our texts, but I think
Pretty
it's like
close.
this week or next where it's
That's
been a
awesome.
year.
Well,
Yeah.
congratulations on making
Yeah,
it this far.
thanks. Thank you.
I'm curious, like, what's your postmortem on year one? Has it been great? Has it been challenging? Has it been both? I'm sure.
Yes,
What have been
and
what have been the highs and lows this year? What things did you maybe wish you knew before you started?
the lows are too numerous to recount. So for the audience, for Josh's family, I got laid off. Me and Steve got laid off. So it wasn't like, hey, well, let's plan and then go out on our own like these, fearless conquerors. It was like, F, what do we do now? So Steve and I were working together, and we both got laid off along with the entire marketing team, the entire sales team. And so it was like brutal, right? Everyone got laid off, half the company. And so Steve was my video editor at that company, and I was doing a lot of video content. Turns out Steve is like way overqualified to be a video editor. He does literally everything. So he's now producer Steve instead of editor Steve. So we got laid off, and it was like, what are we gonna do? We could go play the same song again. Like we could go to another dev tools company, do the same shtick where we do videos and futz around on Twitter, and like I don't want to do that. Like I just don't. I played that game. I think we won. We had massive success at this company. Then they changed their strategy, and it didn't matter. Right? So we were getting users that were correct until they changed their strategy and then said, we don't need those users anymore. Bye. And I was like, oof, that doesn't feel good. Like I did my job. What the heck? And so we decided, you know what? Let's give this a go. Let's go out on our own. And it's very hard. It's very, very difficult. When we got laid off, I was on paternity leave. So I was on paternity leave with the new set of twins. So we had 2.5-year-olds and two, at that point, 3-month-olds. I'm the sole breadwinner in our family. My wife works very hard, but she works at home, right? And so I've got the weight of the world on my shoulders. I've got a million kids, and then I developed rheumatoid arthritis at the same time, presumably due to stress. And so I'm just like down. I am super down. This is hard. And so Steve and I were like, you know what? Now or never. Like we're either going to do this right now when we've got this momentum. Like I feel like we had the community on our side of like, boy, y'all got wronged. And it was like, all right, let's ride this wave. Coming out, we had all this attention. And so we decided we would give it a go. And we set out with some lofty ideas about like being consultants, video consultants for companies that didn't really pan out. And what we landed on was in-house courses. And so we busted it to get 2 courses out last year, the SQLite course and the Postgres course. And we got those courses out and they did fantastic in terms of sales. And I think near the end of last year and the beginning of this year, I had kind of assumed like, hey, we're on solid footing. We are a going concern. And it's become clear to me in the last month or two that like, we are in a very launch-driven business, which is fine. We're good at launches. But we have not yet nailed down like the operational mechanics of being a business. Like we have these 2 courses out there, the 2 database and then screencasting I brought into the company. And we have the Rails one, and those are selling, but we've not yet like honed the engine to make those things sell more durably over time. And I feel like that is what we're trying to learn right now is, hey, you guys are great at creating courses, great at being instructors, and great at creating a spectacle. Like I can create a spectacle. What we need to learn now is how do we create a durable, long-term business engine? And that's the part where it's like, I don't know, let's figure that out. And so that's kind of the phase we're in right now.
Do you have people to help you figure that out? Do you talk to any like coaches, or do you have friends who are in similar industries who give you tips, or are you feeling blind?
Yes, both. I mean, I'm fortunate that I'm like friends with a lot of people that do this type of thing, at least similarly shaped businesses. And so I'm always kind of talking to them and bouncing ideas off of them. Steve, like I said, is a multi-talented, multifaceted person. And he has a guy for everything. He's like, oh yeah, I got a buddy I worked with 10 years ago that does this. And I'm like, yeah, how do you have a buddy for everything? And so I feel like he's always talking to somebody about this. But Steve and I we probably talk an hour or two on the phone every day, just like brainstorming. We consume a lot of the same types of media. And so read a lot of the same books, that sort of stuff. So yeah, we kind of get ideas from all sides, but then there's also these things that's just like, dude, just pick up the money that's on the ground. And those are the things we're trying to like, hey, make YouTube videos about databases that lead people to the courses. Figure it out. And so those are the easy ones where we're not trying to invent the wheel. We just need to push the wheel downhill. And those are the ones where we're like, all right, we can do this.
It's exciting but scary too, just to be on your own and to be like, there's opportunity, but you have to go get it and do it right. And I applaud you for doing that. It's fun to watch you do that, and we're rooting for you. Thanks. For sure.
Yeah. It's if nothing else, it's great content. Maybe maybe we don't make it, but at least it was good content all along the way.
Right. It's good for the memoir you can write and sell
exactly.
Eventually. Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, cool. We're nearing the end of our time. I think we like to just kind of give a shout out to something that we're excited about or something we want to pitch, whether it's a TV show or movie or open source project. But we have you here, and like, if there's one thing that you could like shout out and tell my friends and family to go do or check out, do you have anything at the top of your mind, Aaron?
Like a cool tool or something I've been
cool tool or
digging
cool
recently?
Yeah.
So like I mentioned earlier, I'm in this phase where I'm trying to wield AI to prevent my own destruction. And so part of me feels like AI is going to destroy my job and take the food off of my table. Okay, that sucks. Let me figure out how I can use the tools to make sure that that doesn't happen. Because if I just turn a blind eye, I'm going to be blindsided. But if I can accurately and effectively wield the tools, maybe I stand a chance here. Mm-hmm. And so been dabbling a lot with these like AI tools. One that I have found super helpful so far is a very simple one called Super Whisper. And that allows me to talk to my computer and it dictates. And so it seems very simple, but like if I'm going to be doing a lot of like talking to LLMs where I need to like ask it a bunch of questions, it's way easier to just hit Option Space and then dictate a full paragraph of questions into the LLM and then let it chew on it for a minute. So that's a pretty low stakes one. The other one that I have found increases my leverage, and that's what I'm always trying to do, is increase my personal leverage, is one called lex.page, which I think is real. Let me make sure that's the right URL. InsaneURL.page. Yes, lex.page, and it is a writing assistant AI. And I'm very precious about like my non-technical articles. I want them to be, written by a human, but lex.page is sort of my writing assistant. So it helps me write things that I think are impactful or useful, but it doesn't actually do the writing part for me, which I think is still requires a human. So Super Whisper and lex.page are my two picks.
I love it. The Super Whisper I've seen pop up everywhere too, and I have the same sort of like, isn't this just like normal dictation? But apparently it's worth it. Like, I should check it out.
I think so. I don't think I pay for it actually. I think I'm using the free version, but it's like universal and very accurate and very fast. And so I will just like click into a text box on any web page or the ChatGPT desktop app, and then I'll hit Option Space, start talking, and then like let go, and it like puts all the text in that text box. And so it's kind of awesome.
Yeah, that's cool.
Austin, what about you? Got anything on the mind?
Yeah, so I've got two. First of all, I'm as a father and a husband, I don't have a ton of time for video games these days, but I recently joined an extremely amateur Rocket League league. Have either of you played Rocket League? Have you tried
just once,
playing soccer with cars video game?
I'm terrible at it.
It's extremely hard, but I joined a free league that has prize money. So as soon as prize money was on the line, I'm like, I don't care if I'm going to win $50 at the end of I'm putting in 100 hours. so I can win this $50 gift card to Outback.
Makes sense. Yep.
And it's a lot of fun. It's bringing me right back to my middle school days when I would be cussing people out in Call of Duty lobbies, just bringing out the inherent rage of being partners with someone that's terrible. All those fun things. I don't know if it's a recommendation necessarily, but
an anti-recommendation. No,
yeah, it's something I've been thinking about a lot. The second thing I wanted to talk about, maybe not a pick as much of a topic that I wanted to bring up, is we have a couple very experienced dads on the pod, and Josh and I have discussed potty training in depth on a previous episode. And Aaron, I wanted to get your take because I have one daughter and she is almost 2, and she recently had an accident in the bathtub, and I'm looking forward to cutting down on those kinds of incidents. So I wanted to get your take. What are your potty training magic tricks that make it all super easy?
Steel yourself. That is my only trick. Prepare for this storm. We tried it twice and it didn't work the first time. And so I think there is some aspect of it where it's like, they just kind of have to be ready for it. But the second time it worked so much better. We still have an occasional accident here and there, but we did the whole like basically be naked for a day or two, leave the potties out, leave books and stickers and, stuff, and have regular like, all right, let's go sit on the potty. But yeah, the first time it was just like not even close to working. And I think that's common. So the trick there is don't get discouraged if you try it when they're, late 2 or middle 2 and it doesn't work. It might take a little bit more maturing until they're ready. And I will say, I think our girl picked it up much better than our boy. So each set is boy girl. And so it's interesting to see the developmental differences between boys and girls. Yeah. And I think the girl picked it up a lot quicker than the boy did.
Yeah, well, I was hoping you'd tell me there's just like a combination of words or snacks I could employ to just make it happen really easy. But
nope. Gird your loins. That's the only tip I have. Ungird theirs and gird yours because it's not super fun.
Yeah, I'll plus one that advice, Austin, and then I'll just say like the bathtub accident. It's a rite of passage. It's just like it happens in that every time. For me, it's just like, oh, I should have seen that coming, but I didn't. Yeah. And you're like, how did you let that slip out? But it happens, and then they move on, and then they're potty trained, and then you're like, oh, that happened, and it's done now. So
and that's just another fond memory you look back on.
Right.
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Josh, what do you have?
I have, back to this sort of AI stuff, a new voice model dropped this week from this company called Sesame, which I had never heard of, or at least it's one of these research papers, but it's a fully working thing. But you can click into the website and chat with one of 2 of the voice models, and it is uncanny. It feels like you're talking to a human. It's very very human-like, very low latency as well, and so it's the closest I've seen so far of an AI voice being very human-like. So I'll drop a link into the show notes for sure. But I thought that was really cool this week. I pulled it up for my wife Bree and I, and we were just talking about things. And we knew it was an AI, but but it's still pretty cool.
For the first few minutes, you thought.
For the first few minutes, and then we got lost in conversation, and
I will have to check that out. I thought you were going to go a different direction because 11 Labs just released a new speech to text model that is supposedly amazing. So it's for transcribing stuff, but I have not heard of this Sesame one.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of it either, but I saw it on Twitter. So cool.
There's one more thing I wanted to mention. Sorry, Josh. I guess we can call it a third pick of mine. I wanted to call out old real-time strategy games like Red Alert 2 and the Command & Conquer series and Age of Empires, because Aaron recently had a moment of Twitter fame or infamy. Not sure.
Fame for a while until Big Dog replied, and then it was like, what do I do now?
Aaron, tell us the story of your encounter on Twitter.
Yeah, so I tweeted, Red Alert 2 came out, I don't know, 2000 or something. So I'm 11 years old. Red Alert 2 comes out, changes my life. Me and my brother play it all the time. So just recently, a few days ago, I tweeted a picture, a screenshot of Red Alert 2, and I just with the text, "The world you were born in no longer exists." And it was like, I knew it was a good tweet the moment I wrote it. I knew that it was going to work. I had seen that phrase before, "the world you were born in no longer exists," and I was like, it was a gut punch. And then I had long ago tweeted a picture of Red Alert 2, and it did pretty well. And I thought, put those things together, and we got a winner on our hands. And we did. We got a winner on our hands. And so I tweeted it. It got 1 million impressions,
Wow.
which is like mega viral for me. And then the next day, and I don't want to say I caused this, but hey, might as well. Nobody's here to fact check me. The next day, Electronic Arts open sourced the code for that series of games. Not that particular game, but that series of games. And so I was like, this is my second bite at the apple. So I quote tweeted my original tweet and said like, "Hey, this thing that went mega viral yesterday, remember me? They just open sourced all of the code like for this series. I wonder who's going to do the first remake." And that one went mega viral. That one got like 900,000 impressions. So the original tweet is up to 2 million at this point. And then I'm sitting on the couch. And I'm checking the replies because I had muted it because it was like annoying. And so I'm scrolling through some of the replies to see what I had missed. And I saw someone tagged Elon Musk, and I was like, why would somebody tag Elon Musk into this? Like, leave him out of this.
Yeah.
Like him or hate him, he tweets too much. So I've had him muted forever, right? Had his name, had Tesla, SpaceX, Elon, everything muted. And I'm like, God, why is somebody tagging him in? And I clicked through to that thread and realized not somebody tagged him in. He replied to me. He replied to my tweet and said something silly like, "Cool, I used to play that game." And I'm like, "Did you?" But it doesn't matter. It's Elon Musk, you know? So he replied to it. Alexis Ohanian, the founder of Reddit, quote tweeted it. Sean Purry, the My First Million host, replied to it. And so it was like, I don't know what good this is gonna do me, but I'm famous, and so it was kind of a wild ride. Definitely a fun Twitter viral moment for sure.
Oh, that's so
Very
cool.
cool. Let us know when you get the invite to the Oval Office.
Yeah, I will. Yeah, I'm your president now. So
I'm your president now. Oh boy.
All right, Josh, we can wrap it up there.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Aaron. This has been a pleasure.
yeah, this is fun. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I've enjoyed watching your journey from the early days of the try hard. I think it was the try hard era. I forget what that was. Maybe a couple of years back.
Maximum effort era.
Maximum effort area. That's right. And yeah, it's a joy seeing you produce cool things, and I encourage you to keep going. And thanks for chatting with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I don't know if we figured anything out, but it was at least fun. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, I think we did.
Yeah,
Cool.
Aaron, why don't you tell folks where they can go to give you money and learn more about what you're up to?
Yeah, for sure. You can go to Elon Musk's website, x.com. He's a friend of mine. You've probably heard of him.
Right.
Twitter, I'm Aaron D. Francis, D for Daniel, and same on YouTube. And then you can go to aaronfrancis, no D, .com, aaronfrancis.com, and you can probably find links to everything. Honestly, Twitter's probably the best place. So Aaron D. Francis on Twitter.
Okay, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate you hanging out.
Yeah, absolutely. Talk soon.
Talk to you later.